This is how Nick Heidfeld's F1 career ended, enwrapped in flames, escaping his burning Lotus, about to be fired and replaced by a mediocre career killer from Sao Paulo. Many people feel that this was an unjust way to bow out of the sport. No celebrations, no pomp and circumstance, just a long list of lost opportunities and chances. But how did we get here? And why did he find himself in such a shitbox in the first place? It's the story of Grand Prix racing's most successful driver never to win a race. 12 seasons, 13 podiums, 0 wins. That nil right there solidifies Nick Heidfeld's status as the ever-present bridesmaid. The man who should have been more, could have been more, if you ask some fans or YouTube commenters. Well, what if we take a look for ourselves and dive into the supposedly overlooked Odyssey of Nick Lars Heidfeld? This is probably how most of you remember Nick Heidfeld, fighting his heart out, flying the flag for BMW as part of their bid to turn Sauber into a top team. Some might assume that him ending up in such a position would have only been natural. His junior career was plastered with gold, winning German Formula Ford, Formula 3, and even Formula 3000. The latter championship seems especially important as this was the precursor to GP2, now known as Formula 2. Mercedes had certainly recognized his abilities and signed him as a junior driver, so right from the early years, the pathway seemed to have sent Heidfeld into the stratospheres of McLaren. He'd have the chance to test for the then World Championship team, learning a lot from one of Grand Prix racing's most successful outfits. Goodwood 1999 is a prime example of Heidfeld's early heyday, setting a mesmerizing lap record on the illustrious hill. So when the time came for Formula 1 to come calling, it seemed that Mr. Mercedes was ready to go. 2000 finally saw his long-awaited debut, turning almost a fourth of the grid into Eigentum der Bundesrepublik Deutschland. However, this immigrant-deporting, Autobahn-adoring, genocide-supporting jest of a country wouldn't witness the birth of a star on the silver-arrowed horizon. We're talking about the turn of the millennium, a time during which Prost Grand Prix, Heidfeld's new employer, had stumbled and tumbled into fiasco after fiasco after fiasco. The result? 0 points, 11th in the Constructors' Championship, all around forgettable for everyone involved, including Nick Heidfeld and teammate John Alesi. Directly comparing one of F1's youngest drivers to the elder statesman from Avignon is not particularly fruitful. That being said, Heidfeld did finish ahead of Alesi in the championship, despite being outqualified 9 times. Still, Heidfeld managed to swim and secure a Sauber cockpit for 2001, where Prost had started the previous year with high expectations. Sauber found itself in the middle of a supposed slump. Fitting then that their 2 young hotshots managed to flip the script and finish 4th in the constructor standings. Hinveld's home team had built a quick car for its pair of potential Grand Prix superstars. Heidfeld's debut season hadn't been a big success, all things considered. Compared to the hype surrounding Jenson Button that season, his exploits were almost non-existent. That was about to change. Button's campaign at Benetton was about to turn into a disaster, while Heidfeld had managed to score a podium at Interlagos, round 3 of the 2001 Formula 1 World Championship.
Nick Heidfeld does indeed finish on the podium for Sauber. It's been an extraordinary afternoon here.
The kid from Mönchengladbach has finally arrived. Welcome to the party. Please serve yourself, good sir. Or has he? See, his teammate was none other than rookie sensation and future meme marvel, Kimi Matthias Raikkonen. His background couldn't be further from that of his teammate. Mercedes had continued watching over their protege, somebody who'd been racing cars since 1994. Raikkonen, on the other end of the spectrum, only had 23 car races under his belt before joining Formula 1. Nevertheless, he impressed from day 1. Scoring points on his debut in Melbourne would have helped, and some of the sport's most beloved legends would start singing his praises.
And he is a phenomenon. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I hope Peter Sauber, for his sake, has got a very binding contract. Peter Sauber needs to have one that's made out of titanium and welded shut to keep Kimi Räikkönen, because all the top teams will be looking for this young Finn to join them.
Side note question, have any of you ever heard anybody from within the world of Grand Prix talk about Nick Heidfeld this way? I suppose not. He hadn't become a meme, a tosser like Rosset, yet when push came to shove, he might as well have gone back to being the Prost afterthought. Mika Häkkinen was about to enter his sabbatical/retirement, so McLaren were in desperate need for a well-performing driver. Who better to put into that silver arrow than the next superstar from Deutschland? Sauber's de facto lead driver had managed to outscore Räikkönen after all. Well, fuck. According to rumor and innuendo, it was Häkkinen who'd suggested or insisted that Ron Dennis should sign Kimi for 2002. Looking back, their decision is one of the best in the history of McLaren, missing rings and all. That doesn't change the peculiar position of our protagonist, though. Heidfeld, for lack of a better term, had been overlooked, chucked to the side for a younger, more exciting toy in the palm of Dennis F1 empire. The stormtroopers of McLaren were to fly into the future with an Iceman aboard. No worries, Nick had plenty of time left to enter a top team and succeed as a world champion. Right?
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
He'd continue racing a Sauber for another 2 years, fighting midfield battles against BARs, Arrows, Jordans, and the alike. His teammates were to be another rookie, Ferrari junior Felipe Massa, and veteran vice-champion of 1997 and beloved Jordan figure Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Again, statistics were often in favor of Nick, however, he didn't dominate in either case, even losing out in points compared to Frentzen during their season together, far from Heidfeld's supposed peak in performance. I know that according to Heidfeld, the decision to sign Kimi instead of him didn't frustrate the 1999 F3000 champion. Even so, reading between the lines might tell a different story. Spiegel had interviewed Heidfeld in mid-2003, one of his most difficult seasons yet. Sauber had tumbled back into their old ways of seemingly underperforming in spite of their strong sponsorship. At the time, Nick was still contracted to Mercedes, so a move to McLaren wouldn't have been off the cards. If Räikkönen were to flop, who knows what might... Oh, come on! Does the fact that McLaren Mercedes signed your former teammate Kimi Räikkönen instead of yourself hurt? No, that doesn't sting. I'm young enough. If I continue to perform well, I will get my chance at a top team. That was just a decision I don't really understand, but one that I can't change a lot about. It doesn't concern me, though. He'd go on to repeat that he doesn't understand the decision. What he was probably concerned with was the direction Sauber had headed. I'm not sure whether he just quit or Peter Sauber decided to fire him, or if both parties had just felt frustrated. All we know is that for 2004, Sauber would sign 2 new drivers, one of them a former teammate of Heidfeld in the form of Felipe Massa. Not what you would call an ideal situation for someone who wants to become a Formula 1 world champion. He was consistent, solid, somebody you could rely on in most cases. Then there were instances like Monza 2003. In a season marred by disappointing performances, Peter Sauber's team was about to score, Heidfeld being in P8. Frenzen's gearbox had quit, which meant Quick Nick needed to defend from Alonso to bring home a valuable championship point. As much as that point was needed, he lost the position to Alonso in the process of being lapped by BMW Williams' Marc Gené.
Nobody should pass you on the final lap, or there's a crash, or both drivers go out.
That's how Willy Rumpf saw it, the then technical director at Sauber. Surely it was a calm, sportsmanlike move to not block Gené. At the same time, everybody involved from the Sauber side wasn't particularly pleased. Could you all do me a favor and keep the story in mind for now? We'll come back to it, I promise. F1 2004 was in fact to see Heidfeld return to the grid. Jaguar had been rumored as a potential team to sign the future Ewan McGregor lookalike. Nonetheless, his way would lead to the more flamboyant, colorful, charismatic Jordan Grand Prix. Eddie and his rock and roll outfit aren't what you call a perfect fit for the reserved Heidfeld. Around this time, German television started to focus on his lack of aura, to use modern terminology. Does he just need a bit more of a spark to truly shine in F1? Maybe then McLaren, Ferrari, and Williams will take note of this underrated talent. Such narratives aren't new over here. How else do you think we were able to hype up Adrian Sutil for half a decade? Besides, Heidfeld's contractual ties to Mercedes had officially been cut in 04, so there was no obvious way into the top cockpit he'd envisioned. Jordan and Heidfeld performed a few small-time miracles. Fisichella, one of the new Sauber drivers, found himself stuck between Bryan Danielson's long-lost cousin for a number of laps, painting a rather ironic picture. Points happened to be sparse, while Eddie Jordan was full of praise for his newest signing. Dare we call this a cynical attempt to sell him off to another team? Cheeky. Cheeky. BMW Williams hadn't lost one of their stars due to early retirement. They had just mismanaged to the point where neither Montoya nor Ralf Schumacher wanted to stay with the team. Jenson Button was intended as their new superstar, only for BAR to step in and kickstart an entire contract fiasco. Long story short, Williams needed two drivers ASAP, no questions asked. Mark Webber made the jump from jaded Jaguar. His journey one not too dissimilar to Heidfeld's. Seat number 2 was intended for Antonio Pizzonia, a talented chap formerly known for furious performances in British Formula 3. Pizzonia and Nick Heidfeld went head-to-head in a direct duel for the remaining BMW Williams cockpit. Rumors imply Brazil's newest Grand Prix hope had the upper hand in terms of sponsorship and was favored by Williams' upper management.
When we did the shootout, I was in Jerez, one of my first tests for Williams, and I heard Pizzonia on the other side, but we were split by a wall, so he didn't know I was there. I heard him talking to the physio, and I put my ear against the wall and heard how he already discussed with the physio that he would give him a small percentage or a bonus when he would get points and podiums and so on. So again, there for me it was like, oh shit, he already knows that he has the drive, and I just was on the other side of the wall thinking, no, not with me, wait.
We have decided at the very last minute that Nick Heidfeld will be the team's regular driver.
Finally, the kickstart, the beginning of a new journey. 5 years of hard work paid off. The grind, the sweat, the toil, all of it was going to be worth it. 2005 and its long list of rule changes can provide Webber and Heidfeld with the backdrop for a superstar-making season. What we didn't know at the time, Williams' peak in terms of performance had long passed. To TL the DR of its messy history, both Heidfeld and Webber were never happy with the FW27. Highlights included a double podium at Monaco and Nick's first ever pole position at the Nürburgring of all places. The Green Hell had been an early home to his blossoming career, so it's not a surprise that this was a sensational story considering the origins. Then again, adjusted for fuel, Mark Webber was the quicker of the two that afternoon. More impressive and memorable, to me at least, was Heidfeld's daredevil lunge on Alonso at Monaco. No signs of hesitation or a lacking will to thrill and put himself to the forefront. Hello world, I'm here. I'll make my way straight to the top. Watch me. Such bright spots were the exception to the rule of dismay for Williams that year. P5 in the constructors table was nothing to write home about. Furthermore, Heidfeld wasn't able to race in every Grand Prix that season. Injuries prevented a proper full-year duel between him and Webber. Taking the races both were able to take part in, Heidfeld had a slight edge in terms of race positions, whereas qualifyings lent a clear victory to the Cambermill kid. Just for reference, what had Kimi Räikkönen been up to in the meantime? Oh, what is that? It's F1's very own divorce department! BMW and Williams split, Sauber is bought out by Munich's motor company, and Heidfeld is going to jump ship to his old employer. Heidfeld went on to lead the charge, contributing to the end of Jacques Villeneuve's F1 career. Germany 2006, in turn, was his final outing in Formula 1, irrespective of later attempts to return to the paddock. Out with the controversial Canadian, in with Polish dynamite, Robert Kubica. BMW had found their dynamic dream team. Both managed to score podiums at Monza and Hungary respectively, solidifying P5 in the Constructors' Championship. Even when you might think this should reinvigorate Nick Heidfeld's career, his upcoming existence next to Kubica might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Hype is something that eluded Mr. Consistent for most of his career. Some young prospects came and went, all of whom had possibly received more attention than our main character. Kubica's fast-paced arrival on the scene was a threat to his #1 status. A young, fresh-faced Sebastian Vettel added to this potpourri with stunning free practice performances, breathing down the necks of both race drivers. For Heidfeld, about to enter his 30s, it was now or never. 2007 saw Heidfeld's literal F1 peak. Fifth in the Drivers' Championship was a new high for the veteran, having managed to beat Kubica over the length of a season. Right up until Belgium, he was in the championship fight, mathematically speaking. And many will remember his legendary duels with none other than Fernando Alonso.
This is Mercedes-Benz versus BMW, and BMW passed. That's a great move again from Nick Heidfeld. There's Alonso, just couldn't slow it down properly, and Heidfeld says, I'll have that back, thank you. He's trying to go around the outside, he'll have to double back underneath, and Heidfeld absolutely claimed the apex of the corner, and Alonso there super late on the brakes, and he nearly had to take to the escape road.
As Alonso goes down the side of Heidfeld, and that's not normally a passing place, but it is if your name is Fernando Alonso. Here you can see Heidfeld having a go at Alonso, and it's not the first time this season that the BMW has passed Alonso's McLaren.
This right here is where Heidfeld would shine the most. Wheel-to-wheel racing, calm, calculated, knowing when to attack and go for a gap. Remember, this was right after Michael Schumacher had retired from Formula 1, so for the time being, Nick Heidfeld was Germany's #1 Grand Prix racing driver. BMW's marketing department were on quite the spree, which resulted in him lapping the legendary Nordschleife with his BMW F1 car. Outside the top team's Fantastic Four, he was the guy. Kubica's performances weren't problematic, seeing as both a lack of experience and bad luck hindered his championship standings. So if Nick ever thought about easing off the pedal, his upcoming campaign would prove a tougher challenge. He must have been very aware of the looming potential Kubica possessed. Public bars were regular, with the pair being anything but friendos. Enter 2008 and BMW's renewed ambition to win at least one race that season, a goal that seemed to be only a matter of time after impressive performances from Kubica. Heidfeld had dropped back in terms of qualifying, which in turn had turned Krakow's favorite son into the de facto team leader. Nick's future was in doubt once more, his contract ending after 2008. Gone were the memories of high-class duels with the double world champion from Oviedo. A trip to Canada was to help him out a bit, potentially. Suddenly, amongst all the chaos, there was a chance to win. All Nick had to do was keep Kubica behind, the sensation of the season, on a differing strategy that required one more pit stop. BMW wanted to give Kubica a fair shot, resulting in a radio call to Heidfeld telling him, "Let Robert through." He did just that.
As Kubica goes up the inside and takes that place away from Heidfeld.
Yeah, I mean, we believe this is net for the lead of the Grand Prix when all of the pit stops have shaken out, and that was a critical pass for Kubica. Was Heidfeld instructed to ease his way through there, to let his teammate through?
This season he has been flawless. He's been on the podium on 3 occasions already. He's yet to unlock the first victory, but it's coming now here in Montreal, where Lewis Hamilton took his first win 12 months ago. Robert Kubica wins in Canada. He takes the lead in the Drivers' World Championship, and a star is well and truly born.
Nick's quite the nice chap, isn't he? If he'd been more of an egomaniac that afternoon, he might have been able to win himself. Better yet, BMW had achieved their goal for 2008, winning a race. Job done. See you all in 2009. Do you remember that story I told you about Heidfeld missing out on points at the 2003 Italian Grand Prix? Lovely. I can't help but think back to Canada 2008 in the same vein. Here was a chance for Nick to be, to put it mildly, a bit of an asshole. Ram somebody off course, block his competition, pretend not to hear his team radio, the usual for racing drivers, really. He chose not to do any of these. He stuck to being a team player, a nice chap to race, and one can argue that he paid the price. The F1.08's pace wasn't going to keep up with the likes of Ferrari, McLaren, and Renault. Kubica's championship bid was never to come to fruition. Well, at least 2009 is going to... Kurz had become a catastrophe for BMW, sinking their proverbial ship into the deep sea of F1's ever-present midfield shenanigans. Munich made up its mind and decided, amongst the financial crisis of the late 2000s, to just cut the program outright. Heidfeld and Kubica were left without a job. Nobody gave a toss that quick Nick finished ahead of Kubica in 2009. By the end of 2009, Heidfeld had managed to outscore Kubica 150 to 137 in points. 2010 had the potential for Heidfeld to experience a second or third, fourth spring. Braun GP had just trounced the field and needed a new driver next to Nico Rosberg. Jenson Button, the reigning world champion, was off to race for McLaren Mercedes, and who else but Nick Heidfeld was to complete this German dream team of marketing?
Michael Schumacher is back in Formula One, and that's official. The 7-time world champion was formally introduced to the staff and crew of his new team Mercedes on Wednesday after signing a 3-year deal worth around $10 million.
Yes, even the older Silver Arrows did not resist the allure of King Michael himself. Ready to return to the throne he had once occupied, Heidfeld was to receive a paycheck as a test driver. Not the greatest position considering the new testing ban implemented a few years earlier. F1 2010 was characterized by one of the most bizarre silly seasons one can imagine, with many seats still up for grabs after Abu Dhabi the previous year. That doesn't explain why Formula E's favorite Cirque du Soleil artist was not racing in Bahrain the following March. According to journalists like Mark Hughes, Heidfeld had been in talks with quite a number of teams for quite a number of years. Honda was one such candidate, courting BMW's former number 1 in 2008. He declined and decided to stay aboard the Bavarian train. A few outings on loan for Sauber or testing for Pirelli didn't suddenly turn Heidfeld into a superstar. His existence within the sport remained anonymous, fully devoid of excitement. Kubica's sideways move to Renault saw the Grand Prix winner produce magic from time to time, something Nick was not in a position to do himself. And so we go all the way back to 2011.
Severed in a high-speed rally crash in Italy. Kubica had 7 hours of surgery after he was airlifted to a hospital near Genoa with multiple fractures and internal trauma.
Tragedy had struck when Robert Kubica crashed at a rally event pre-season. Severe injuries to his right arm prevented any chance of him competing that year, which meant that Renault, now known as Lotus, were looking for a replacement. Heidfeld, having been signed as a test driver before, was to race the Black and Gold Beauty, a car that for some time was actually respectable.
Nick Heidfeld takes third, a podium position for the Renault driver, standing in for the injured Robert Kubica.
That right there was Nick Heidfeld's final F1 podium. Where some had developed high hopes for the Enston outfit, their performance was to take a huge dip. Heidfeld wasn't smashed by teammate Vitaly Petrov. Was that enough though? No, not in the eyes of Eric Boulier. Behold the power of the Bruno Senna cash flow. In the end, you have to ask yourself, what went wrong? What was missing from the Heidfeld tool shed? Was it a lack of pace? Was it a lack of testicular fortitude? That is not to imply his career was only a result of not being enough of a dick. Years later, Heidfeld declared that he was proud not to have turned into an asshole during his F1 career. That said, there is one thing he thinks he should have done differently.
I would have probably looked and focused more on beating my teammate, because there were occasions, for example, where on a single race weekend, I thought I was ahead of my teammate, but the overall performance of the car was not good enough to score a decent result. Either no points or just 1 or 2 points. And then I said, I don't care if I'm quicker than my teammate. I just want to move forward and get some points or more points. And then, for example, went down a different route with some setup stuff and then went in the wrong direction and actually in the end was slower, both for qualifying and race. But instead of them being 11th, I could finish 6th or something like that. So this is an approach which maybe in hindsight was not right, because people always look first at how you compare to your teammate. And even though most of the time I did well against my teammates, that would have looked better.
Who's to say whether such a shift in attitude is the key to his overlooked F1 adventures? Hughes specifically ranked him in the same ballpark as David Coulthard or Rubens Barrichello, well-known number 2 drivers of their generation. The question of what he had to have done differently to stand out can be summed up with just be faster, lols, if we're to read Formula 1 as a pure meritocracy. Fun fact! It is not. On the flip side, for Heidfeld to be considered overlooked, underrated even, there has to be an inkling of unfairness to his journey, right? A sense that it's not him, it's the car, the environment, the incompetent management, any of the sort. I stumbled upon a blog post the other day declaring Heidfeld to be one of F1's lost talents, a driver who deserved much better, continuously caught in a loop of being in the right place at the wrong time. That's not how I read the story. Nick Heidfeld was a damn good racing driver. That should go without saying. He made it into bloody Formula 1 for crying out loud. He managed to stick around for about a decade, never causing a stir, never falling into the depths of clownery. His was a career of consistency, of very little highs, very little lows, all very much in the spirit of the mellow. His attributes aren't what the glamorous world of F1 enjoys as their next big thing. They'd rather push the young gun, themselves pushing their cars to the absolute limit, showing raw speed with inconsistencies planned into the ride. Add to this a paddock often described as a piranha club. Those that don't fulfill expectations will be chucked to the wayside mercilessly. That is, unless you bring the bags of cash necessary to run the whole shebang yourself. Nick Heidfeld was never a Max Verstappen, a Lewis Hamilton, a world champion pre-elect performing to that standard. In the age of television, he was not a personality of pomp. He was known to be a shy individual focused on his job, barring some delightfully devilish dance moves. RTL believed that maybe a different image was the key to opening new doors for Heidfeld, but that wasn't his way. That wasn't him. Similarly, he wasn't a qualifying merchant, a one-lap wonder. He was, in the truest sense of the word, a racing driver, trying his best to further the teams he raced for. He was quick enough to keep himself in the game, yet he never was the game, the main character, the actual protagonist in any way. During his time with BMW, Germany had abandoned any hopes of him ever winning a Grand Prix. Look at Sebastian over here, winning a race in his first full season. It's not that people assumed he was incapable of achieving said task. As Hughes points out in his statement on Bring Back V10s, he was capable of winning races. At the same time, whenever top team cockpits were discussed, the name of Heidfeld was never to be found on top of the list. In the grand scheme of things, Formula One did not think of Heidfeld as a driver irreplaceable. It sounds harsh, it sounds immensely cruel, which is quite fitting for the world of Grand Prix. Marred with judgment, prejudice, arrogance, incompetence. That doesn't mean Heidfeld was to win championships and pick off Grand Prix victories. It just goes to illustrate that a good pair of hands will forever be passed over for the next up-and-coming superstar in training. Recent years have seen a slight shift in this attitude, with Hülkenberg and Alonso managing to swim for long periods of time. Could Nick Heidfeld have had a better shot of his career had happened in a different era, or where consistency was valued more? Perhaps. Heidfeld's Odyssey, unsatisfying as it might feel, isn't one devoid of logic. He never managed to impress those holding the keys to the castle. At every turn where he was overlooked, you can't claim the decision didn't make sense. Picking Raikkonen over Heidfeld was the right decision for McLaren. Not continuing with Heidfeld didn't hinder Sauber in 2004. Not picking up the phone to hand the zip-up file to Heidfeld instead of Schumacher or Hamilton is more than understandable. Even the Renault fiasco can be argued for. Renault or Lotus was in need of cash, and Heidfeld hadn't performed in such a way that he outclassed Petrov. He was there as a solid hand, which, considering the supposed potential of Senna and Grosjean, was not good enough. And yet, to consider his career a failure would do him a huge disservice. Surviving Formula One for a prolonged period of time, hanging with the best in the world, dueling with future legends, demonstrating his obvious talent time and time again, that is remarkable. To survive, to thrive without an oligarch lurking in the background breathing down the neck of one's team boss. He lives a reasonably comfortable life, from what we know, family home in Switzerland, wife and kids, having traveled all across the globe to race the beasts of his generation. To declare Nick Heidfeld's career unlucky or overlooked neglects to acknowledge his lack of spark in a world wired to seek the extraordinary. To call his career a disappointment or lackluster neglects to admire his abilities, his achievements, his timid character pushing for a team more so than for himself. That is the F1 legacy of one Nick Heidfeld, and I feel, from the outside looking in, it's a bloody good one.